Too often we tend to think of a different word when we hear humility. We tend to think of the word humiliation. Does that sound familiar? That is often the concept that we have when we're actually talking about humility. There is a major difference between humiliation and humility. Humiliation, I think, is much easier to define, perhaps much easier to see. Because humiliation is when we make someone feel ashamed or foolish. Pretty easy to see, right? I bet we have all been humiliated at some point in our life. Through some circumstance, something that has happened, we have been made to feel, or we have felt as though we were foolish or ashamed of ourselves. Almost like the cowering dog, right? That kind of humiliation where you are not choosing to become low, but someone has forced you to become low, perhaps even put you in your place. Does that make sense for humiliation? Humility is not humiliation, because humility is completely different. There's a couple of reasons why. The very first is that humility presupposes your dignity. What I mean by that is, in humiliation, you do not have a choice. Someone just brings you low. They bring you down, they put you in the place that you're in. But with humility, you look at your dignity and you let go of it to bring yourself low. It is a choice that you are making. Now, I want to be very careful here, because to understand humility and this choice to make yourself low, you need to understand that true humility is not low self-esteem. We all know people that have low self-esteem. Perhaps we have struggled there. Perhaps you have struggled there. At times I have struggled there with not feeling like you are good enough to measure up to somebody. And sometimes we make low self-esteem out to look like humility. Oh, everybody else does everything better than I do. I couldn't possibly do that as well as. I couldn't do this. I can't do that. I don't have the gifts that they have. I don't have the abilities that they have. And we present this idea of low self-esteem. Or maybe we really feel as though we can't. Low self-esteem is not humility. Because true humility realizes the talents, the gifts, the abilities that you have, and lets go of it. Low self-esteem says, I can't do any of those things. Humiliation says, you're not allowed to do any of those things. Humility says, I'm going to be able to let go of this. In order to have humility, you must have a good sense of self-worth and your abilities. In fact, part of the danger of humility, and the reason I think we struggle so much with it, is that we really need to know who we are, and there is a tendency to go the other way, to lead into that arrogance, right? I know who I am, I know how well I can do it, and try and keep up with me. True humility says, I know that I can do this well, I know that I have abilities, I know that I am valuable to people, valuable to God, and yet I'm willing to let go of that. Second aspect of humility that differentiates it from humiliation. Humility is willing. Humility is a choice. It is a willing choice that we make. In humiliation, we have no choice. The people do not typically say to us when they humiliate you, do you care if I humiliate you right now? Do you mind if I put you in your place? That's never said, right? It's just done. There is no choice in humiliation. Humility is a choice to bring ourselves low, to think of somebody else instead of thinking of our own needs. The third reason that humility is different, the third defining characteristic, is that humility is social. This is not the private act of banishing proud thoughts or refusing to share one's accomplishments. Have you ever tried to get someone's accomplishments out of them and it was worse than digging for gold? That's not humility. That's modesty. It is okay not to run around and to share every compliment that we, or every accomplishment that we have made. That's okay. But humility is not just the banishing of proud thoughts or refusing to share your accomplishments. Humility is about using your resources, using your abilities for the sake of others instead of yourself. Humility says, I know that I have abilities. I know that I have gifts. I know that I have something to offer. And rather than using them just to benefit myself, I'm going to use them for someone else. Do you see the difference between humility and humiliation? You see the difference between humility and modesty? Humility is really its own animal. Little illustration. I had a chance, every now and then I go through phases where I love to read. Now that astounds my wife, because high school was a phase where I didn't love to read. All of high school was a phase I didn't love to read. And I would do my best to get out of reading anything just because I didn't want to. A number of years later, that has changed, and when I get the opportunity, I love to read. Now, sometimes I'm reading Dr. Seuss, and so if I rhyme, it comes out of that naturally. But I love to be able to read and study and grow. And to prepare for this, I read an excellent book on humility. And one of the illustrations that the author uses is a story from the 1930s. It involves 3 young men getting onto a bus. And in the back of the bus sat a man all by himself. The young men who were in the front of the bus, they saw this guy in the back and they started to insult him. And much to their surprise, they didn't get a reaction. And so they did what most young guys do, turn up the volume, right? Apply a little bit more pressure. And so they raised the level of the insults toward the man on the back of the bus. They turned up the heat, really hoping to get a rise out of him. Nothing happened. Until finally the bus stopped, and the man stood up. And they got real quiet because at that moment they realized that he was bigger than they thought he was. Much bigger than they thought he was. And he made his way forward to exit the bus. And as he was exiting the bus, as he was passing them on his way to exit, he handed them a card with 3 words on it. Joe Louis, boxer. They were trying to pick a fight with the man who would go on to become the heavyweight champion of the world from 1937 to 1949. See, we think that being humble means having no value, or putting ourselves low, or assuming that we have nothing good to share, that we have no abilities, no gifts. Joe Louis had value, right? And do any of you think that there would have been a challenge for him to take on the 3 young men that were insulting him that day? Probably not a problem at all, right? And yet through humility, through lowering himself and thinking about their needs to survive, right? It outweighed his need to validate himself. See, the truly humble person has a very good sense of self-worth. He knew he was a good boxer. He didn't need anybody to tell him that, and he sure didn't need to prove it to the young men who were on that bus. He could have easily turned the tide and humiliated them. Instead, he offered humility to them. I bet that was a name they never forgot. He didn't need to defend himself. He didn't need to promote himself. See, this should sound very similar to the life of Jesus because Jesus lived with humility. Jesus says in Matthew 11, verse 29, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." I want to be very clear here. Jesus is not saying, "Hey, come learn from me because I'm such a humble guy." You ever heard somebody say that? You can trust me, I'm humble. In fact, there was an aspect of even preaching on humility. Why are you doing this? Because we need to talk about it. Not because I have arrived there, not because I understand, or not because I'm the most humble person. Ask my wife, or any of my close friends, or my family, and they will tell you, "Jamie, you are not always the most humble person." Those of you who are laughing, especially a lot, Joanne, this is not something that we have all arrived at, but we need to talk about it because Christ lived with humility. And the kind of humble in heart that he was talking about, all of the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, they wanted to heap on the responsibilities, to bring everyone underneath them low so that they looked better. And Jesus, as he comes onto the scene, he ministers to people of Jew and Gentile origin. He eats dinner with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes, right? Not exactly the people of high social standing. And he says, take my yoke upon you, for I am gentle and humble in heart. Meaning that I don't want to humiliate you. I want to take the things that I have, the gifts, the abilities, the reconciliation that I am about to offer, and give it to you. And I want you to learn to live that way, because it is better than the way you are living now. Of all of the stories that we could use to illustrate this, I think the best of Jesus' ministry and this aspect of humility that he lived with daily is illustrated in the Gospel of John, chapter 13. John chapter 13, verses 1 through 17 tells a story that you are very familiar with. In fact, it is something that we celebrate this time of year. April 2nd is Maundy Thursday. That is the Thursday before Good Friday. Typically in the Church of God, that is a time of foot washing and communion. And we draw this idea of foot washing from something that Jesus actually did with the disciples in the Gospel of John. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Jesus answered, a person who has a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, not every one of you. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Think about this scenario for just a moment. Jesus knows that his earthly ministry is drawing to a close. The disciples still didn't grasp it. But Jesus knows. And so they have come together to celebrate the Passover feast, one of the biggest festivals of the year. And as they are eating their meal, they sat down to eat with dirty feet. You're like, no big deal. I do that all the time. Major difference in the way they live to the way we live. Number one, most of us have open-toed shoes, except for some ladies that really like the open-toed shoes, right? And in summertime, some of us guys might don a pair of sandals. But for the most part, we have nice shoes that protect our feet. We have nice socks that keep our feet mostly dry, right? They didn't have that. They had pretty open sandals. We also arrived in nice cars on paved roads for most of us, right? Did any of us really have to walk through the mud to get here? No, probably not. We might have had to drive through the mud, but we probably didn't have to walk through the mud to make it to our destination. Another part that I know we don't often like talking about, but is very important in this, Our septic system is much better. Their septic system was the street. There were a lot of reasons to wash someone's feet when they came to your home. Part of it is just to keep the outside dirt out. And here they are, with dirty feet, sitting down, eating their meal. I don't think any of them just forgot that they had dirty feet. I don't think any of them just, I said it's not a big deal, there's not a servant here, we're not going to do it. I think there was a conscious decision by each one of them not to wash somebody else's feet. And the reason for that is it was not their job. When you were having a Passover feast like this, when you were having a dinner and inviting people to your home, you were supposed to have somebody present to wash the feet of your guests. It was the job of a servant. It was not the job of the guest. And so when Jesus stands up and begins to do this, I will guarantee you within moments, everyone's eyes were focused on Jesus because he was doing something that he wasn't supposed to do. Of every person in the room, he was the last one that should have stood up to wash everyone's feet. Do you catch that? The last one that should have done that. And yet, he was the only one who did. And we get a glimpse of how out of place it was for Jesus to do this by Simon Peter's response. Lord, you cannot do this for me. You cannot. I will not allow you to humble yourself like that for me. I will not allow you to use your gift and abilities to serve me in this manner. Jesus' response is, I have to, or you have no part of me. You have to allow me to humble myself and do this, or you're having no part of me. What a striking answer. You have to allow me to bless you, or you're really having nothing to do with me. Think for a moment. Have you ever been served by someone who you consider better than yourself? Have you ever been served by someone that you regard as perhaps more spiritual, a spiritual patriarch or matriarch? Someone who perhaps has way more education or a lot more, or if you're sitting there saying, no, there's nobody around me that's better, we really need to talk. If you have, think about what it was like when they served you. It is a very humbling experience, isn't it? When they choose to put their sense of self-worth to the side and serve you, it is a very memorable experience. One of the most memorable experiences I have specifically on this topic of foot washing was the time that one of my pastors washed my feet as a youth. You're my pastor, why would you do this? You shouldn't be doing this for me. We should be washing your feet. It was a number of years ago, and it sticks with me. Because someone that I considered better than me, greater than me, lowered himself and served me in a way that made a lasting impression. Same thing happened here with Jesus. When we see genuine humility, it has a huge effect on us. In fact, that's our third point. Humility can have a deep impact on us, on our friends, and in the lives of those around us. Through humility, we can have an impact on this world. We can serve others, we can care about others, and we can bring healing through humility. This is not running around as meek little people saying, I have no value, I have nothing of worth, I have nothing to contribute. No, it is saying, I know that I have something to contribute, and I'm going to lower myself and serve you. It is a great way to make a difference. I want you to think for a moment about the following list, and you can make a lot more. Republican versus Democrat. Pro-choice versus pro-life. Conservative versus liberal. Or how about one of the real hot buttons right now? Same-sex marriage versus traditional marriage. How many of you know people on both sides of almost all those arguments? How many of you know exactly where you stand on those arguments? How many of you are saying, why are you talking about this, Pastor Jamie? I'm having that same question myself. Do you know the answer that we have promoted as a society is one word. It's tolerance. We tolerate everything, right? We say, tolerate differing opinions. Tolerate differing views. And what we're really saying is that every different view is valid. Every different view is equal. And that may work well when you're talking Republican versus Democrat, because I have a general opinion of politicians, and that's not always the best, right? Some of you agree. But what I have found most often within these camps, regardless of what side you're on, there are some common things that happen. Rather than trying to win or to connect or to help other people, we go to our camp and we spend all of our time convincing ourselves that the way of Republican is right and the way of Democrat is wrong. Now let's say you're on the Democrat side. I don't want to pick on anybody. So we go to the Democratic side and we say the way of Democrat is right and the way of Republican is wrong. And now, we are not trying to solve anything here today, because I know our congregation, we have good people on both sides. So it sounds like Pastor Jamie is saying tolerate, right? Each side is equal. No, I am saying it is okay. And what we read with Jesus is Jesus lived with humility. Did Jesus have very definite ideas of who he was? Did he have very deep convictions about who God is? Did he have very solid understanding of what it meant to live a life with God? Absolutely. Did he go around condemning sinners? Well, kind of, but he did it in a great way of compassion. He did it with humility. He had deep convictions and a sincere love for people that he came into contact with. And he would choose to lessen the amount of conviction that he would show everybody as he loved them. Meaning, as soon as he met with someone, he didn't say, you're going to hell. Right? Is that what we read from Jesus? As he met sinners, tax collectors, and prostitutes, his first words were, you're going to hell. That's not what he said, right? In fact, he would show them love, and he would eat dinner with them. Now, what did they need? They needed a right relationship with God, right? And he made no bones about that, but they wanted to hear it because of the way he treated them. One of the problems that we have with the polarization that has occurred in our society is we spend more time trying to convince ourselves and others we are right than we spend trying to love the people, not necessarily the ideals, but trying to love the people on the other side. And we usually turn the attacks that we have, the reasons that we disagree with something, into personal attacks. In fact, it is almost that if I can convince you how wrong you are, then you will know that I am right. Has it ever seemed like that to you? I have considered multiple times disabling my Facebook account. Because I have friends who are Republican, I have friends who are Democrat, and I have really good friends who just don't share their political ties, and I appreciate them. And every time I turn around, one is condemning Republicans, one is condemning Democrats, and I say, but I don't care about that, I care about you. Show me your life. Don't try to convince me why you're right. Don't try to convince me why I'm wrong. Let me care about you. Or care about me. See, this idea of humility, it can really turn the tables in the fact that we stop trying to convince each other about being right or trying to change somebody's opinion so that they think they're wrong, and we care about them right where they are. It doesn't mean that I have done anything to change my view, but I have put that lower than my love for you. Does that make sense? I hope so. Imagine for a moment, imagine how changing this would be if at a Democratic Party, Republicans passed out cold water to all the Democrats. Now, is that something you ever think you'd see? Why not? Because they don't like each other, they don't agree. But imagine if we found humility in Republicans where they said, I am going to go to the next Democratic convention not to condemn, not to rebuke, not to hope that they really screw up and I catch them in it, but to serve them. Or imagine if Democrats humbled themselves and did the same thing. Instead of about promoting our agenda and promoting ourselves and making sure that I'm right, that I'm the one that comes on top, we go and say, here is something totally different. How can I help you? How can I minister to you? When we do that, when we start to show love and stop trying to humiliate someone or to berate them to see things in our way, we open the door to a conversation of souls. A conversation that goes much deeper than just the topic or the belief that we have, but a connection that we are all looking for. I'm convinced that the reason Jesus' message has impacted people for over 2,000 years is because he lived with humility. It wasn't about coming onto the scene and convincing people that he had all of the answers. Now, those of us who are Christ followers, we believe that Christ has the answers, right? But we don't see him standing up time and again, seeking large audiences of people, trying to say, I have it all right, they have it all wrong. We see him ministering, showing love, showing compassion, living with humility, and people flocking to him, and then hearing about it. There is a tremendous difference in chasing the crowds and the crowds chasing you. When we live with humility, we're not trying to just get a big name for ourselves. We're not trying to just make sure that everyone agrees with us. We're not just trying to make sure that everybody else understands I'm right. Have you ever tried to win an argument with somebody who thought they were always right? What was it like? It's frustrating. In fact, I have certain friends that when we talk, I tell them, I don't want to hear this. I would love to hear about you. I would love to talk with you. I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to play golf with you. I'd love to go fishing with you. I'd love to hunt with you. Not much talking there, right? I'd love to do all of these other things with you. But I don't really want to talk about this. I want to be with you. This idea of letting humility define who we are, it's not about thinking that we have no value. It's not about thinking that every viewpoint in the world is equal. Because there are some viewpoints that I will never accept. There are many religions that say that Christ was not fully divine, fully human. And yet for me as a Christian, that is central to my very belief. I cannot accept it to be something else. But it sure doesn't mean I can't love you if you disagree. See the difference? Humility says, I will love you even if we disagree. Last question I always ask with every sermon. Where do we go from here? First, I hope you have a little better understanding of humility. That it's a choice. That it is something that we can do, that we can choose to do. If you don't have a better understanding of humility, let's talk. Because maybe I didn't do a good job explaining it. And there's a chance that if you don't understand it, somebody else doesn't understand it. And so let's talk about it. But second, if you understand it, I would encourage you to develop it within your current circles. Because I'm going to tell you, if you can learn to be humble with your family, you can learn to do it with almost anyone. Right? Family knows our shortcomings. Family typically know our tendencies to always want to be right. And so if we can learn to be humble with our family and friends and even our coworkers, imagine the impact that it can have. And if you feel like you're doing that pretty well, there's a third step. I would encourage you to stretch your humility muscles, reaching out to those you do not know. That means we may meet someone that we don't see eye to eye with. That means we may meet someone that we actually strongly disagree with. It may mean that we meet someone who rubs us the wrong way. I don't know if you've ever met someone like that. But the moment you met them, you knew, we're going to have a struggle together, right? Through humility, we make a choice to lower ourselves for someone else's benefit. I'm convinced it is one of the major keys to helping people see that we are Christians and to making an impact for Christ in our home, in our neighborhood, and in our community, ultimately within our world. Let's pray.